Kate Mulefalcio, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. This is part 6 in our book, The Eden Conspiracy. This will be the last video on this book, and I have to apologize. I think it'll be pretty short. I couldn't stick around and make the other one longer, so two sort of shorter ones. And we kind of left off, we had just talked about from Sumerian tales and from biblical tales, you get the stories of these objects, sometimes interpreted in the olden days, as wholly divine or spiritual. Now we're thinking twice about it, that create winds that terraform Earth after the flood, push away the water, clear out the air, make the skies bright, dry the land. And they're noisy, like a technology, and they vibrate, they roar. So let's move on with that idea. Modern theologians refuse to want to engage with the idea of technology being described in the Bible and other ancient scripts. Obviously, because of Paul Wallis's background, we're focusing primarily on the Bible, but he makes reference to lots of ancient scriptures from global scripture, global belief systems, and oral tradition. And there's so much synchronicity in what they think or how they explain all of this. It's very interesting. So a lot of what they describe in the original texts is not in keeping with the known technology of the time, as it were, clay tablets. There's all these narratives from ancient times that humans and non-humans are interacting. How people choose to define who and what that's about, that's where the controversy lies. Today we have more context. We have technological context. We hear a roar and fire and smoke. We think engine, that wasn't available in their reality at the time. We have more of a vocabulary to describe things. We're less likely to describe something as a monster or a dragon or a beast, and we can give it a more technological frame of reference. They could only assume that it was inexplicable because it was divine. But these kinds of misunderstandings, these were encouraged and manipulated by the people in control, because the not knowing creates fear. It's this overpowering thing you don't understand. There's this fear. And if you can be the individual, the leader, to ramp up that fear and then offer protection or a solution, you have control to your advantage. So the nobility, the kings, and the priests were the ones that did that sort of thing. They played controller and gatekeeper. Human ancestral memories, they're found in folklore of cultures globally. This is ubiquitous. There's nothing unique about the Bible. And plenty of much older sources reflect similar encounters and belief systems. So the message here is that humans remember, they retain the memory of trauma, and they express collective experience either in written scriptures or spoken mythology and lore and oral tradition. Music would be another way of passing these things down. But there is kind of a common thread through all of these, of the benevolent intervention of colonization. I hate to use the word benevolent and colonization in the same sentence, but that perhaps the original intention wasn't necessarily completely evil. That this began as a promise of some sort of cosmic assistance, And this idea is often built into language. So the example he gives, in New Guinea in December of 2022, he was walking on the beach with Joan Miller, who was teaching him the language of the local people and telling the tale of ancient memory that was familiar to Paul when he heard the story, from several other areas. So he's hearing this from somebody in New Guinea, and it's exactly something that he's familiar with from Genesis and from Sumerian mythology. So in Genesis, Eden, the Garden of Eden, and the fall of humanity is described as the descent from the perfection of God's original creation into depravity by our own poor choices. Let me find the quote here. And so Christian Orthodoxy presents the fall of humanity from the state of perfection. And if you look at it today, he said, with a different frame of reference, a different perspective, and you think in terms of Yahweh as we have now sort of parsed him, this evil entity, or not a powerful God, a malign and uncaring and vengeful being. If you look at it that way, and you look at the serpent also, take both of them as two Elohim, two sky people, projecting their power and control over humanity, then we can look at Eden to be a place of genetic engineering in which non-human visitors from the stars take an innocent being, a primate of some kind, and proceed to clone it in order to upgrade its intelligence and fertility. The upgrade is achieved by splicing human DNA with DNA information from the sky people. So this is also what he's hearing from his friend Joan. He said this is repeated often in indigenous narratives all over the world. In New Guinea, the story is told in the roots of their numbers. I thought this was so interesting. They're like number system. So 1 in their dialogue means friends in a ship. 2 means moon school. 3 means spirit dance. 4 means needle and container, and 5 means the spirit goes up. So she tried to explain this to him, and it's a little bit complicated. I'm going to gloss over it and see what we can get here. So this is what she's trying to get at. The word for 1 recalls the arrival of friends from the stars in a ship or canoe. And this reminded him of the Cherokee story of friends from the Pleiades who arrive in a craft that looks like an egg. Then number 2 tells a story, it's Moon School, tells a story just like that of the Mohawk or the Greek Babylonian stories, the Book of Enoch stories, the Sumerian stories, the Mayan, the Hebrew stories of Asherah, and then that story we just talked about of the Mimi. This is the story of primordial education, receiving guidance and evolving in that way. Number 3, the spirit dance reminded him of the description of the Mimi spirit dancing with his ancestors. And by the dance, they interacted with humans and passed on advanced wisdom and knowledge. And that's the significance of the spirit dance to our development as a civilization. It's a more intimate mingling of our ancestors with the visitors. The ancient Celts had a curiously similar word, the Shay. In New Guinea, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's like Shada, so it's very similar, referred to the dimension of the spirits intimately close, which could be interacted with through certain mystical protocols. Then number 4, the needle and container describes an object familiar to us in the 21st century, which would have mystified our ancestors. A needle today plus a container is called a hypodermic and a syringe. So these forebearers have described to us in simple and direct terms the visual memory of out-of-place technology. Of course, the anomalous presence of this ancient hypodermic raises the sharp and pointy question, good one, sharp and pointy question of its function. Was this prehistoric injection the moment of modification, of upgrading our ancestors? Or a totemic reference to a prehistoric lab? Then we have 5, the spirit goes up. Is this the departure of our visitors into what we call space, echoing again the Cherokee story of our ancient visitors departing in their egg-like craft? And she talks about the word ruach. Joan tells him the word ruach came to mean the Spirit of God in Hebrew, just the same way that their word for God is sapach, and it too means moonship. So when you really dig into the linguistics of a culture, you might really be surprised about what you find. He lists the many correlations. I've gone through that because I thought it was interesting enough to present it to you. We have time. The Labu of New Guinea talk about ancestors coming in moonships, and eventually the word became their word for God. The Filipino have tales of underwater non-humans that enchant humans with sweet songs to entice them to be used to hybridize for DNA. I mean, how many cultures talk about mermaids? And in Ireland, there's the lore of the silky being kind of a shape-shifting, like a seal kind of, but can become a beautiful woman, and it entices people away, and then they're gone. He sees the old origin stories across cultures in the similarity of word usage and in their words' meanings and their origin. So usage, meaning, and origin are very similar across culture. Now we're on chapter 14, the conclusion. I'm sorry. This is called The Distant Horizon. And in 2023, of January of 2023, he was in Mexico City at what was called the Portal to Ascension Conference. Very diverse. He said he's never sure how his information will land in an audience. I can imagine, you get the wrong audience, they might revolt against you. So his discussion of how the Bible was pieced together in stages, which is historical fact. So I'm surprised that other people are surprised, but there you go. And it's often involved in the retelling of ancient stories from older cultures. This is a fact that a lot of certain religious groups do not want to admit, that what's in the Bible is not original, in especially the Old Testament especially, is not original. It descends from earlier scripture, stories, lore, and oral tradition. And there's a connection, the people of the book, the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian origins are all similar. They all go back to these old stories. These old stories come from places like Babylonians and Sumerians, and when you really start to dig back into the past, you realize that there's nothing new under the sun, basically. And then it's all global too. Abraham and Sarah were from Mesopotamia. Were they real people? They came from Ur. They came from Mesopotamia. Clues that sources are from different times exist. For example, clean and unclean animals were put in the ark. That wouldn't have been done. And this idea about the fact that some animals are clean and some animals are unclean, it evolved after Noah. So Paul dives deep into the biblical origins of a lot of this, and it brought together in this conference diverse ancient texts And he says, you know, he uses this word, which kind of makes people cautious, but just because it triggers certain associations doesn't mean it can't be true. He says that these diverse texts are brought together in, he asks, is it a huge conspiracy? And he points out many so-called conspiracies that did prove to be true. There are hidden motivations in and secret laws all abound. They abound. It was a conspiracy theory to suggest that the British government had secret talks with the IRA. When people suggested that was shocking, and dismissed it as, oh, that's just conspiratorial nonsense, except that it was true. They discovered later. Covert politics always happens, done behind closed doors, and are absolutely facts of life. I think we should probably know that from today. Governments communicate with other people on a need-to-know basis, and that what they let public is wholly need to know, and they don't think we need to know anything. But eventually, over time, you know, the power hiding secrets lightens, the control lightens, the walls come down, loosens, and eventually people do find out. So yes, manipulation of all of this knowledge from the past to control it and to limit it was a conspiracy. And it was done on purpose for an agenda. So let's talk about that. I think you can entertain these notions without being pathologically paranoid. I think, you know, if you look at it in a clear-eyed way. He says, yes, and this is talking to the group at this conference. The Bible is a conspiracy in the sense that the final redactors, you know, people like the Nicene Council, deliberately set up to cover up the full spectrum of Hebrew ancestral memory. So, you know, the culmination is like the Nicene Council, not the total culmination, but plenty went on before that to manipulate and to withhold information. These are vital and detailed memories concerning humanity's great leaps forward and the role played by extraterrestrial intervention. The redactors did their level best to airbrush that whole layer out of the picture. In that sense, yes, we have to say there was a cover-up of vital information, withholding of information, a misrepresentation of information. A key part of their commission was to black out the textual evidence of our upgrade from hominids, reference to previous civilizations, or ET entities and technology encountered by our ancestors. Somebody understood what was going on and did not explain that to the rest of the people who were uninformed, had no frame of reference, and were superstitious. Information concerning a continuing program of hybridization. So he asks, would you call that a cover-up or a conspiracy? And he says, of course you would. So they believed they were clearing up superstitions and felt there was integrity to what they did. I don't know if I fully agree with that. Did they, Paul? Were they really being people of integrity? I wonder what was their motivation. I'm not sure it was as benevolent as he thinks, but you know, he's a minister, he's a good person. But it meant that people, if they were to believe this story that was presented to them, we would all have to deny our roots, and it demonizes like the ET people and ET contact and their intervention. Was their intervention benevolent? Was it mixed? Did they have malign intention? Hard to say. It's been manipulated, the story of it. The Christian church really drove this, of course. The Garden of Eden was an innocent place. There was a rebellion against God because women wanted to be smart as God or smarter. And so we deserve hellfire. And because of the threat of hell, we need the church. This is what it all boils down to. Manufacturing the need for their existence and their control. It's a great way to manage people, and it empowers religious leaders, and it's all based on the falsehoods of this early Christian church and previous churches too. I mean, there were priesthoods in all of these religions that maintained a distance as the elite retained information from themselves that other people were not allowed, neglected to explain the true meaning of rituals and stories, and fostered fear and superstition. That was just the human history. That's how it's been. In 318, the emperor, I assume we're talking about the Roman emperor, made himself the defender of the faith and made all pagan religions illegal. The Romans were interesting. We've talked about this before. For a very long time, they would, that spent all their time conquering and marching out and colonizing, conquering, enslaving. But one of the things that they did do that was interesting is they would go into a place with a different culture, different religious belief, and they would say, okay, here we are, we're in charge now, and you go ahead and believe whatever you want to believe. Continue to practice your religion. But you have to put forward the supreme divinity of the emperor. You acknowledge the divinity of the emperor. We're all good, and you can do whatever else you want to do with your pagan beliefs. That ended, and it ended as the power of the Christian church evolved. Their acceptance and tolerance of other beliefs diminished and disappeared. So they made the emperor the spiritual authority. And with all that implies, authority, emperor, we're talking power, control, misogyny, etc., etc. So the boundary between government and religion basically is too blurred to make a distinction. This is one of the big reasons, it's not specifically this, but what this devolved into is one of the big reasons the founding fathers of the United States very much wanted to keep religion and politics, religion and governance separate. So bishops at the time were kind of a counterpart to senators. And the people were meekly obeying and meekly praying and meekly acquiescing to the power and authority. And this becomes a manageable theocratic empire with Christianity as the religious gloss. I love that definition because that's exactly what it was. It was an illusion, a veneer. Since then, every colonization meant extinguishing non-Christian cultures and their tales of paleo contact, ancient technology, genetic engineering, and draconian non-human governance. And this is 100% a conspiracy of suppression. It's a conspiracy of silence. Academia has known all about this for sure since 1872, when they found the cuneiform tablets with the world's oldest story. And this is rarely, I couldn't read my writing, it's rarely discussed in actual places of worship. You're not going to hear this talked about in church. Not a drop of doubt, not a drop of analytical thinking or critical thought is ever allowed in a religious context for most Christian churches and most other conventional churches. Let's be fair. In this way, senior clergy, prelates, popes, theological educators, and seminary faculties have been privileged with one set of information, while people of faith faithfully attending synagogues and churches are offered something else entirely. This is a great shame. I think it's interesting. He lists theological educators, clergy, seminary faculties, describes his jobs. This is what he's done for years, decades. And let's talk about faith. Should we accept things without sight unseen? I don't know. That's a good question, right? That's an interesting question to be debated. I would say that in its purest form, that's what we should do. We should be questioning. We should be curious. We should entertain big thoughts. But as it's used conventionally in the United States, the word faith means non-questioning, non-thinking, just accepting this narrative, and then it's rock solid in your head. So Paul is often, oh, wait a second, I skipped something here. Let me go back. So mostly evangelical churches, they're run by eldership boards who keep pastors in line. Pastors might go to school and learn this, but they can't talk about it in their churches. So any intellectual approach to the Bible is considered sacrilege. This is the power of group think. When churches join and they reinforce belief of individuals who are afraid to speak up or are not allowed to speak up. So Paul says he's often approached quietly after he gives a talk like this, radical talk. He's approached quietly by people that have a naughty secret, he says. This is the power of taboo. They're not allowed to talk about experiences or concerns or doubts, etc. Paul is often asked, are you leading people astray or are you making amends? Doing penance for leading them astray before? Is that why you're motivated to do this? Frank Schaeffer told us that his life now is dedicated to speaking truth to power, to make amends for working with his father in the late 60s, early 70s with that burgeoning moral majority nonsense that went on that his father was so big on. So he says he's just sharing what he learns and he feels responsible to be transparent. He, in good conscience, can't perpetuate the lack of information. He feels an urgency because of the implications of not knowing. He says he's met many people who have been hurt by the taboo of discussing paleo contact and a possibly populated universe. He has reframed, and his reframing is experienced as a powerful relief to him to be able to admit all of this. And he really feels like he doesn't want to waste any more time. He engages with very diverse groups of people, and he's asked, in view of growing corporate power, is there even any hope? And he acknowledges our loss of freedoms. He says, yeah, this is extreme and it's a threat. But he sees a spectrum of powers at play in humanity. There's a diversity of the powerful ones. There are benevolent powers who elevate and empower humanity for a more enjoyable earth experience. And I think in this case, he's not talking about human leaders. He's talking about extraterrestrial influences and powers. There are different ones. We talked to Dr. Ogi Ogas, and he absolutely said, well, it eventually, I mean, watering it down to its most basic explanation, there are the benevolent and the malevolent entities. They're not all the same. And they're working at loggerheads. They're struggling for control over the human race. That's really true, which kind of has that distant echo of the fall of Lucifer and the struggle between the angels and the devils. And that always that little kernel that unites all these stories. Where am I here? So he says there are beings who uplift us and protect us. He says the powers of the cosmos are at hand. The earliest church fathers believed that this help is available to each of us, but we must not think that we're alone in the empty cosmos. We absolutely are not alone. We're already in control, and we're already in contact. And we have to acknowledge it. We have to use our power, and we have to unite with cosmic beings who care, which is entirely possible. Edgar Mitchell, the great Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut who dared to speak out, said, "We must take our place in the community of spacefaring civilizations. We are hampering our own evolution with our superstition and our fear. Knowledge is power, and that's why it's withheld from us. Our ancestors spoke of cosmic helpers and their availability." Eric von Daniken, another very brave person, because he wrote Chariot of the Gods and all the books that followed. And I remember when that book came out, I was in high school, and I remember reading it because I did this in high school. I would read books and then I would say, you have to hear about this book I read. And I would regale my friends with this book. And it was a small school, so, people gather around at lunchtime and I'd tell them the story, and then they'd all roll their eyes and they'd say, "Helen, how can you read that? How can you even entertain such ridiculous ideas? This is fantasy. It's a fairy tale." And it just had a ring of somewhere in there. Maybe some of it is embroidered, but it had a ring of kernel of truth in there. And I still feel that way. And he's still going strong. And he's a controversial character and he's not perfect, but there's something there. So Eric von Daniken thinks that this knowledge would be clear if we could translate things properly. And the 10 key words that he believes need to be clarified. And Paul says, well, we've kind of gone through those, but these are the words, and I will really quickly read them and I won't bother to go back and redefine them. Elohim, Elion, El Shaddai, Yahweh, Siba Hasamayim, Olam, Kavod, Ruach, Haya, Basilia, Arnon, and Asherah. This is an etymological approach to cut through translations and cultural associations and really get down to the absolute basic sources and re-evaluate what our narrative is based on what was really said. So our ancestors tried to warn us of the covert government and the hidden influence in politics. Not so hidden anymore. And they wanted us to be discerning, to use discernment. That non-human intervention is in geopolitics for the good and the bad. That we need to understand the dangers of false information. And there's this cynical pitting of nation against nation, people against each other, and proxy wars being fought by other powers through us, and factionalism and xenophobia being encouraged. Really, we need to increase unity and decrease fear, and that there's reason for hope that we can do that. He said before the God stuff, the Bible was an origin story. Before the divinity stuff got kind of injected into it. It was an origin story of paleo contact and the truth of human potential. We must be willing to question our ready-made conclusions. And really it's going to require us unlearning and reorientating. And he ends the book by saying we have a long journey to go, which is a little ironic little pun there, talking about cosmic travel. We have a long journey to go. So that, sadly, is the end of this book. This is a really great book. We have another book of his that we will do. I won't do it immediately, and try to mix things up and keep everybody a little something for everybody. Let's put it that way. So I know a lot of people are really into these kinds of stories, and I've got some up my sleeve. But I think next week we'll do something different, and you just never know. So thank you for watching. I may or may not, I hate to make false promises, may or may not do a little deeper dive into this behind the paywall. We'll see. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed it. And check out Paul Wallis's other books, and check out his work on through YouTube. Anyway, it's free. The fifth kind. I knew I could remember it. I wanted to say the fifth dimension, up and away. The fifth kind on, it's from Gaia TV, I think. There was something else I was going to, I've covered all his books from the first till this book. I believe there are 3 we've done. I can't find one of them in my videos. I apologize for that. But I was trying to make a playlist a couple of weeks ago, and maybe I overlooked it. I'll look again. I do this stuff so late and I'm tired, and foul it up. So that's all. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I really appreciate everybody who's joined up as a member, become my friend. And I appreciate you guys' feedback. It's 99.99% positive, so I love that. Keep that coming. But any kind of feedback is welcome, and suggestions and ideas for things to cover. And in the meantime, slanga foil, slancha.